Hi, welcome back to episode 2 of the Overcast podcast. Today we're going to be talking about issues with AI and potential regulations that can be made. This is going to be a continuation of the previous episode, so link will be in the description for that. Make sure you watch that. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to look at some points first from the article titled AI Assurance to the Public Trust but Verify Continuously.
Hmm.
Um, there's an interesting uh, point made in this article that I wanted to bring up right away. This actually relates to the issue with AI and the potential approaches, but also with the bias um,
Mm-hmm.
that I found really interesting is that it's always kind of brought up the idea of bias problems um, or like bias problems for AI, right?
Yeah.
Um, because the data sets and everything can have bias in them, and it's just the idea that like when you talk about AI and bias, there's no like formal definition of what that really means. In this article, from what I read, um, no one really had. There is no formal definition. Every organization that works on AI has a different definition.
Yeah, so I guess in order to like regulate AI properly, you probably want to create like a formal definition so that you know like what you're regulating because with the biased data it's it's very human even though it might not seem to be uh, because all data in a way is biased because it is created by a human and uh, it's really hard to get rid of that bias and without that like formal definition it can be very hard to regulate exactly.
Yeah, no, yeah. They even mentioned in the article that like this is sort of like a necessary first step,
Yeah,
that like
yeah.
an agreed upon definition for what bias is
Hmm.
for like that specific field of AI, and they mentioned kind of like you will have differences with bias for like facial recognition systems and bias for like self-driving vehicles.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
you need those definitions kind of set in stone before you go out and starting to even work on potential approaches to regulate these technologies.
Yeah, that makes sense
Mm-hmm.
because I know in the article, uh, the author says that like bias for a like a self-driving car could make it so that like the car completely goes the wrong direction, which is like completely different for like let's say like an AI that selects resumes, which is based on like previous hiring data, and the bias there would be like, oh, maybe they hire slightly more men than women, and that's based on like some like misogynistic data or even just like um, there could be more men in that field and the bias could be based on that.
No, no, yeah. Um, yeah, regulating that bias would have to be different between the different technologies, right? Because self-driving car going the wrong way is going to have a whole different data set of like the real world versus just resume parsers having a limited set of just being kind of fed resumes and past work experiences, right? Like they're totally different kind
Hmm.
of data sets that are fed into the machine.
Hmm.
Um, so that's very understandable. Um,
Yeah, something related to that I wanted to touch on was in the same article,
mhm.
uh, the author talks about how uh, with AI the standards are much higher than if something were to be operated by a human. So, for example, like an accident rate associated with self-driving cars that's as high as human traffic accidents would, bankrupt the car maker because uh, that's seen as uh, like trust for AI systems or just systems in general, like mechanical systems, must be much higher than if it were to be human operated. And that's just like I guess natural like human psyche. And I thought that was super interesting, and it makes you understand how like important, even from like a business standpoint, because obviously businesses that create AI, their number one uh, uh, goal is to satisfy the shareholders. Uh, it makes you think
Yeah,
that like just for everyone, it would seem that regulating like these AI systems for biased data that could make the systems like perform worse objectively is very important.
Yeah. No, yeah. I agree on that. Like the whole point, right, is are moving towards, AI systems like that and moving the human kind of out of the loop is so that they would be better.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there's what's the point of moving to the system if it's just worse? It doesn't help anybody, right? Like it just makes things worse.
Hmm.
Um, no, yeah, that's a great point there. And I think that that leads into the idea that they bring up in this article as well, that like AI systems have an issue with uncertainty.
Hmm.
Like they don't. It's hard to test and approach AI for how they deal with uncertain or unique experiences. Like a human would be able to respond to some garbage can in front of its path when driving a car. In an AI system, we may not ever have that come up.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's
so it,
like so many different edge cases to account for,
yeah,
and in order to create like a proper data set, you need so many different points of data, and it's hard to remove the bias from that when there's so many points, right?
yeah, and they bring up actually. I have a quote here from them that they say the set of trustworthiness for properties for AI systems that like you would need um,
Yeah,
needs to extend beyond reliability, security, privacy, and usability to include properties such as probabilistic accuracy under uncertainty, fairness, robustness, accountability, and explainability. Like you don't just need them to pass to to be good enough. They need to
yeah,
go beyond
yeah.
the uncertainty.
They can't just satisfy like the bare minimum.
Hmm.
They have to be like objectively better in like many regards.
Yeah.
Because I guess it kind of makes sense. Like at that point, then why not just have a human operate, right?
Yeah.
Because humans are more uh, like,
Robust.
well, not even just like robust, but uh, the more just reliable in general and more relatable for sure. Like I think you trust a human operator way more than you may trust a machine, just in general, even if they
Yeah.
were operating at like the same efficiency, right?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
still I
and
agree
trust
there.
is super important for AI systems.
I mean, I still like going to the bank teller when I need to confirm
Yeah,
stuff. Like I
yeah,
want to
yeah,
talk to an actual human, right?
exactly. Yeah,
I don't like going to the ATMs all the time. If I need to
yeah,
check my account balance or something issue there.
yeah.
Um,
Uh, it's like there's like that personability that comes with like
yeah,
dealing with a human that isn't there in an AI system. And even if the AI system works like a bit more efficient, if the robustness isn't there, and it's not like if you can't like count on the AI to work perfectly every time, then you may prefer human.
hmm yeah. I think this ties in really well with going towards like we got a bunch of the issues um, of trying to like trust it, and I think this works really well towards like how do we now trust them? Like
Yeah, yeah.
how do we go and trust these systems?
Hmm.
Um, and they brought up an interesting, that's the whole idea of the title of this like article, trust but verify continuously.
Yeah.
um, and so they brought up the zero trust cybersecurity architecture, or basically the system in this case it's borrowed from cybersecurity, where the system is continuously evaluated for security properties, and that there's no such thing as just testing the system once, deploying it
Yeah.
and assuming it's always secure and it
Yeah.
always works. And it ties the same way with AI. We can't just test it once, make sure it passes the garbage
Yeah.
can in the way instance, and say it's perfect.
Yeah. Because it can't be perfect, really.
Yeah.
And it even like just with general like development in like software, you kind of have the same system. Like when you're working like on a project and you add like, let's say you add this new feature, uh you want to create like test cases for this feature to ensure that uh going forward, even if it doesn't like break right now, modifying something else in this in the system uh could break that feature like on accident. And
Hmm.
with AI systems, because of their like black box model, it's it's even harder to like to make sure that when you're adding something else or modifying something in the system that something else entirely doesn't break, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of overlap there, and I think we can kind of um, take from our our knowledge and experience in a different part of just software engineering in general and apply it to AI systems.
No, yeah, no, we definitely can. But that's actually a great lead into um, of how we need to test those systems as they're running. Uh,
Hmm.
they even mention how like we should be self-diagnosing, critical AI systems at
Mm.
start when they first run, and also like continuously throughout the operation.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and they bring up a trust elevator that they called it
yeah.
uh, that basically has access to the AI system, um, and it could be like a human, a panel of humans, an AI system. It's something to continuously check, these inputs, like those, like unit testing, and see what comes out from the AI. So like if ever
Mm.
changes, like
Yeah,
if they manage to pass, the self-driving car manages to swerve out of the way for the garbage truck or the garbage can or the garbage truck, whatever, at some point, but then later on, after some changes, because there will be, right? So
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying it's continuous. Um, at some point later, maybe it doesn't.
Mm, yeah. And I I think what's important here is making sure that these like testing systems are accurate to these actual like real world use cases, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
uh if you're testing like even like pre-production, like um before this like system has been released even, uh it's important, like let's say with the self-driving car example, to make sure that whatever like to make sure that your testing scenarios are accounting like these exact scenarios, which can be hard, but I think it's very, very important because with something like a self-driving car, there's a lot of risk that comes with that, right? People's lives could be at stake.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Um, and yeah, self-driving car, but even like not even or not even like that risk, like not even that much of a risk. You still have to have like even if it's not as critical the AI that being used in a self-driving car, like you just have it in, they say resume parser. Even though it may not be as risky, you still need those same kind of regulations around and the same kind of testing around it
Hmm.
because it does still affect people. It may not be in a harmful way,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
directly physical harm, but you still have harm.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Um, so I wanted to talk about this other article. It's titled "The Butterfly Effect in Artificial Intelligence Systems:
Oh yeah.
Implications for AI Bias and Fairness." And it's essentially about the butterfly effect. And um, a good example about like what really that means is the Microsoft Twitter AI Tay, which you
Okay.
might be familiar with uh,
I
from
remember. Yeah.
2016. Yeah, basically they deployed this AI on Twitter and let it just talk to Twitter users, and then the data fed into it was just these replies or people tweeting at it, and eventually, in one single day, the AI became like racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and uh, even like the butterfly effect here is there's like tiny like data points being fed to it of like people that are these things, like even if they aren't really homophobic or misogynistic, they're like intentionally feeding it these like this like poisoned data, right?
Hmm.
Which over time causes like a butterfly effect, which makes the all of the replies from this AI become like misogynistic.
Yeah. Well, that's Twitter for you.
Yeah.
But no. Yeah. That point of how the small effects, each tweet might seem small, but as they add up over time. They can build to bigger and bigger changes. Like you were saying,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very interesting idea. Um, and looking through this article, it looks like they even kind of say how those small initial biases. that are first presented. It probably could have been those first few tweaks that
Yeah,
propagated
exactly.
and cards and caused such large disparities in the eventual you know uh, outputs that it other tweaks that it then did.
Mhm, mhm. Which is why it's, like, so important to continuously, like, verify these AI systems and mitigate these biases, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Because, one tiny bias could result in the AI acting completely different than what you would want it to be, right?
yeah, yeah. I found something really interesting from this article, in that like a lot of the AI systems that we've kind of thought of, with being, like a facial recognition system or some kind of decision making resume system, is that like we don't always think of these as we think of AI right now, as we're thinking with Chat GPT and all that. We
Mhm,
think
yeah.
of that AI as, it's so much like bigger
Mm,
almost,
yeah.
like it's so many more parameters. Um, but they also mentioned in this article that like the training processes for these are so like they're so vast, like they have so much text, they have billions of characters of text in them, right? That like we don't know how much bias is
Yeah,
really in these systems. Like they can be
yeah,
extremely biased, um, and it may seem like there's just like slightly skewed to one direction or the other, um, and how like the butterfly effect could affect these large systems even more than the others.
mm. So, like, how do you propose we remedy that then?
Yeah, so remedying this is probably the hardest part.
Uh-huh, yeah.
um,
Especially because it's like a black box, right?
yeah.
If it shows the importance of, like, making sure at the beginning and continuously, uh, that these biases aren't present because if there's a bias at the beginning, like, of the creation of this AI, it could grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and even if you aren't aware of it, it could, uh, not, like, ruin the algorithm, but, change it in a way that it's, like, almost beyond fixable.
Mhm. Yeah, because basically it would lead to like you know unexpected outputs
Mhm.
that you may not have thought would have been.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like you could have been giving it some training data and then just like some test data, and it just leads to something completely different
Mhm,
because of those small effects. But because there's so many variables that you can't test for because there is so large.
mhm.
Um,
And it brings up the importance of making these systems transparent,
mhm.
and the problem with AI right now, it would seem is there's no transparency whatsoever, especially for consumers. Like, the developers don't even really know 100% how these AI systems work, uh, and there's even more little, um, transparency for the consumers, which are using these AI systems, like, on the daily. You could think of, like, AI algorithms that, uh, are used for social media and regulate, what you see, like, on a day-to-day basis on your feed, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, because like um, at the same like we don't know um, like not we're not like whose data is really being even used to train like it when you mentioned like social media it's like how is that even getting onto my feed exactly
Yeah,
like whose data are they even using they're using everybody's like where is
yeah,
it coming from like who's deciding um or how's it deciding no one knows right they don't
exactly.
know the developers don't know we don't know we don't get to know it seems like from this article they mention how like you kind of need continual monitoring and feedback
Yeah,
from
yeah.
these systems to like track performance of how fair they are. And it just seems like you can't really track that without or give fairness without first letting people be aware
Mhm.
of how they're working.
Yeah, and, there's this other article, called "Who Regulates Our Regulators?"
Hmm.
Regulating social media platforms' use of artificial intelligence to regulate us, and they bring up how, um, uh what's really needed right now is a remedy to uh, these dominant consumer-facing platforms, like social media websites like Twitter or Instagram, that deploy these AI systems non-transparently,
Mhm.
and they bring up uh, something called interoperability, which is the ability of two or more systems or applications to exchange information and to mutually use the information that has been exchanged. And essentially, what it means is um, these AI systems should uh, become open to regulators and even competitors, so that their biases and non-transparency can.
Like be explored basically. So like everyone kind of knows, like it's aware of how the systems work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and I found that really interesting from this article as well, where they mention interoperability, but they also go into transparency.
Yeah.
Um, but they mentioned something interesting in how like the training data and the algorithm itself, right, are constantly changing. Like we mentioned, you don't just test it once, but also
Yeah, yeah.
like it's impossible to forecast real time outcome of Google searches. Like you can't
Mm.
regulate the outcomes of what real time Google searches will be
Yeah, yeah.
because of how well they're real time, how fast they are, right?
Yeah.
And how like a vast search engine optimization, business has to well, it has to optimize the search results. It
Mm.
can't do that, with
Yeah.
complete accuracy in real time. So it's like, how do you regulate that and be transparent at the same time?
Yeah, so I guess perhaps more like work on regulations for that kind of problem are needed, because even like reading these articles by like experts in the AI field, it seems like there are still so many questions that are unanswered about regulations for AI,
Mhm.
because it seems like the field of AI itself is much more beyond the regulations field for AI.
Yeah, so I guess just going back to, approaches to actually regulate and help regulators regulate the AI.
Yeah.
Um, we were talking about interoperability,
Hmm.
um, basically to see inside of the black box.
Yeah. And
Um,
allow like other, um,
yeah,
like competitors and regulators to actually see inside it as well. Because you can't really trust like corporations which act in, a monetary motive to uphold these regulations just by themselves. Like that's just how um, all regulators work, right? They come into the company and they make sure that these regulations are met.
hmm yeah, and it seems like from this article, like how it's being done right now, like how AI is being governed and regulated at the moment is just by through self-regulation.
Yeah, exactly.
And the big technology giants like Google and Microsoft are kind of just trying to persuade that like self-regulation remains the only route
Yeah.
for AI systems, and that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't just be the case that we have to put all our trust into these big companies,
Yeah,
but they will
exactly.
put our best interests at hands because their best interest is to the shareholders. That's what it's supposed to be as a
Yeah.
company, right?
And
Um,
regulatory systems usually in other fields they don't operate that way, right?
no, I'm not sure
Because
in other
that's not how
fields.
that works. I mean, bringing it back to OSHA from last episode, uh, contractors like regulators from OSHA will go to work sites, workplaces, and make sure that there's no violations, right? They'll
Yeah,
have inspectors come in, and there's no like inspectors for AI.
yeah, like OSHA, they literally they come in as you're saying, like they're not just put on the hat,
Yeah,
put on a hard hat
make sure you don't
themselves.
trip and
They're
fall.
doing that because of the regulations, right?
Exactly.
Um, and I think that kind of an idea leads to as well, like if we don't kind of have regulations and we talk about bias data and like discriminatory data and how it just kind of like will lead to biased results, discriminatory results. Um, And if we don't have regulations, then we won't filter those out properly,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
so we won't
exactly.
have results that are fair.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so one last thing I wanted to talk about, um, was, in one of the articles that, we were looking at, um, uh, there's this quote, where in a 2021 poll of, 2,200 American adults conducted by Stevens Institute of Technology, 48% of respondents felt that the positives of greater AI adoption in everyday life outweigh the negatives, but 29% believe that the opposite, that the negatives outweigh the positives. And I think this goes to show that there seems to be a lot of people that, want AI to succeed because uh, while there are, possible negative consequences, like, if artificial general intelligence gets developed and isn't regulated properly and, the entire human race is destroyed, uh, but I think there's a lot of positive like anticipation about AI, and I think proper regulations that could be implemented could make more people positive about the future of AI. And not only would it actually remedy the risk, but uh, I think the subsections of the population that are worried about AI in the future, uh, their worries would be remedied, and I think that's that's uh, that's an important thing that we should be working on.
No, yeah, I mean, even without the idea of having to rely on some futuristic AGI coming uh, upon us, right? We have these AI systems already out there in the wild, like they're already running right now, and
Exactly.
there's nothing there's no regulation, there's nothing around it.
Yeah.
So it's very important that like even if there's a possibility some AGI that may destroy us all, who knows? Um, that before we get there, we should be able to trust the systems, and we should be able to trust that the systems are in our best interest.
Mhm.
And getting there, we can't just trust on self-regulating companies that we just take their word for it.
Yeah,
We should
exactly.
we should be assuring that they are reliable and safe and secure for us to use.
Yeah, and so lastly, when we talked about AI self-regulation today, I think that relates a bit to our next episode, which is going to be the consequences of governmental and corporate overreach in our daily lives. And yeah, see you then.